Hello everyone, welcome to the Salesforce CPQ video series. In this session, we would be looking at attributes. I am Sudha Sundaram. I have 12 plus years of experience predominantly in the Salesforce and the Agile world. I have 11 Salesforce.com certifications, which include Application Architect and Salesforce CPQ Specialist. I'm also a Trailblazer mentor. I have given my LinkedIn and Twitter handles here. If you would like to follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter, please feel free to. So in previous session, we talked about product-related aspects of the bundle, creating products, creating features, product options, and how do we link them to bundle. There is another side of bundles as well, which has nothing to do with products and instead has to do with attributes. And that is what we would be looking at today. What configuration attributes are, what are inline attributes, and what are global attributes. Sometimes we need to collect additional information during the configuration process. This might be something like a color or a size or any other attribute that describes the product. Or it may just be a question that we may ask the user so that we can later use the response by creating rules that guide them to proper configuration. So either way, it just comes down to a field where we need to capture the information. There are three different ways to collect the attributes during configuration. So the first is configuration attributes, the second, inline attributes, the third, global attributes. So imagine attributes to be something like the color, size, a finish of a phone, like the color we choose to say the finish of the phone, or carrier options like T-Mobile or Verizon or Sprint or AT&T or things like that. So first, let's take a look at what configuration attributes are. So configuration attribute is associated to the bundle itself. So in this case, with our example here of iPhone 12 bundle, the carrier here, which is set up, is the configuration attribute. So we have carrier set up as the configuration attribute for iPhone 12 when the user is wanting to buy this particular phone. So one nice thing about the configuration attribute is that the values can also be cascaded to all the product options within the bundle. So we can take this particular carrier selection made for this iPhone 12 and use it to describe the cellular service if the user selects a plan to go with the phone. Now let us go ahead and look at how do we create this configuration attribute. So let us pick the same use case that we need a carrier as the configuration attribute, and we want this to be associated with our bundle iPhone 12. So the first step, no matter which type of attribute we want to create, whether it's configuration attribute, inline, or global, the setup starts with creating the field to capture and store attributes. So in our case, we need carrier as the field. So the first step is to create a custom field with the same API name on both product option and the code line objects. For the demo purposes, I've already created this field carrier in product option and as well as the code line object, and I've used the same API name. The reason for this is when we are in the configurator and are capturing the information or looking at the product options inside the bundle there, in order to save the values, when we hit on save after we configure, they become code lines where we store these values permanently. If we do not create in both of these objects, these attributes are not going to work. So it is very important that we create these custom fields with the same API name on both product option and the code line objects. Now that we have created the custom fields in both these places, let us go ahead and see how do we create the configuration attribute. Like I said, it is associated with the bundle product itself. So let us go to our iPhone 12, which is our bundle product here. Go to the related tabs. And if I scroll down, I would see a section for configuration attribute. So I've already created one for the demo purposes. So we'll go ahead and see what are the fields that we see here. So unlike the numbers we saw in the features options, we see the row order and the column order here for the display order relative to one another. Basically, we have 3 columns and unlimited number of rows. So I have picked here the row order to be 1 and column order to be 1. And I've also given it an attribute name, carrier. And moving on to the position field, we can associate this attribute to a particular spot within the bundle. In this case, we have top of the feature. So basically the position here means it's going to be at the top of this particular feature, which is the carrier feature. So I have a feature for carrier, and on this particular feature at the top position is where I'm going to see this particular attribute created. So though we have positioned it inside a feature, it still describes the bundle itself, irrespective of where we put it in the bundle visually. So decide this position based on the user experience and your business requirement. So one main thing to finish configuring the configuration attribute is telling the system where to store the value. This is where target field comes into place. Populate this with the name of the field we created. So we already created this field carrier, right? So if we do not see the value here in this particular pick list, we may need to update the pick list value to include this field. And while you do that, always use the API name. Moving on, mark the configuration attribute required. So every time the phone is quoted, we need to know what carrier it is, regardless whether they choose a cellular plan or not. Even if they have an existing cellular plan, we need to know whether the phone is compatible for the carrier either way. So that is why we're making this required here. If we want to default this configuration attribute to a preset value, right? So say there is a default object and a default field, which allows us to say where the default value should come from. So if you see here under this advanced section, we have this default object and default field. Say, for example, you have the same field in the quote object, and you want to cascade that value here. So then we just need to choose quote as our default object and give the field name. So that value gets pre-populated from quote. Again, please remember to use the API name while populating the default field here. Let us move on and look at what this checkbox is. Apply to product options. So configuration attributes values can be cascaded down to options. This checkbox allows that to happen. By default, it is unchecked and going to be applied only to the bundle product and not cascaded. However, once you check this box, it means it's going to apply this to the product options as well. If I scroll down a little further, I will see another field here called apply immediately. So this field is available on configuration attributes as well as in the product options. So this basically instructs the configurator to immediately fire the rules as soon as a change is made to this particular attribute. If we want to fire some rules to hide options or show some options or say add or remove options based on the attribute, then we can use this. So we would see about how do we use rules for hiding or showing or adding remove options in detail when we discuss about product rules. But one thing to note is if we overuse this, it slows down the quoting process. So use it only when it is needed and do not check it on every configuration attribute or product option. Now that we looked at the few important fields on the configuration attribute, let us go ahead and add this particular product to the code and see if we have carrier shown as the attribute there. So I'm on a code record here. I'm going to click on edit lines and add product. I'm looking to add this bundle, iPhone 12. So once I select, we see that the configuration attribute that we created for carrier is reflected here. And I do see the options for AT&T, Sprint, T-Mobile, and Verizon. So I'm going to choose T-Mobile here. and click Save. Yeah, I'll go ahead and select an option. I will go for an unlimited talk time and an unlimited data plan. And I'll go ahead and save this. I'm going to go back to the code and go to the code line here for a minute. So if you notice, there are two code lines created, one for the iPhone 12 and one for the cellular service. So I'm going to click on this particular code line and I'm going to go down and look at our carrier field here. So the T-Mobile that we selected while we were configuring the code is reflected here. And remember, we created the fields in both product option and the code line object, so we could store the information permanently in the code line. So that is what has happened here. The carrier got mapped back to this record. Now let us look at what inline attributes are. Inline attributes are used to collect data specific to a product option. In this example here, minutes and data GB, basically the talk and text and the data GB, are captured directly on the cellular service line. Note that the fields will be displayed for all the product options within a particular feature. Say, for example, here we have carrier as the feature, and we have two product options here, cellular service and smartphone activation. So the inline attributes that we created, talk and text and data GB, if you notice, these two columns appear for both the options here. So whether it is applicable to smartphone activation or not, what happens here is the fields will be displayed for all the product options within a particular feature. Now let us look at creating inline attributes. This starts off the same way, like I mentioned, irrespective of the attributes. The first step is to make sure that the fields are created on both the product option and the code line objects. So we pick the use case where we are trying to create talk and text, which are technically the calling minutes or the text minutes, and data GB as the inline attributes. So I've gone ahead and created these two fields, custom fields in both the product option and the code line. So if I go ahead here, I've already created talk and text, and I also have the data GB as my fields on product option. I've ensured I have used the same API names, and I created the custom fields in the code line object as well for both data GB and talk and text. So that is our primary step whenever we create any type of attributes. So now to place the fields inside the configurator, we use field sets because we've created these fields, but we need to place them inside the configurator so the user can see it, right? So we use field sets for this. So let us get on to the product option object and go to the field sets. You will see a few field sets here. And the option configuration is the out-of-the-box field set that we get. It is very common that when you're working with inline attributes that not all of your options or features are going to have the same set of columns, right? So think about using data or calling minutes on a clothing feature. It's totally not relevant there. So the attributes like data and minutes are only for cellular plans. So we only want to display those in those features where we are offering the cellular plans. This is when we create our own field set. So I've gone ahead and created a field set called cellular. I have drag and drop few fields which I require like product name, talk and text, data GB here. So now we have to let Salesforce CPQ know which field set to use for which feature, right? For this purpose, let's go on to our product, which is iPhone 12, and look at the list of features. So we want only for our carrier feature that the inline attributes that we created for data GB and talk and text to show up. So if we get onto this particular feature, we will see a field called configuration field set. So this is where we link the field set to this particular feature. So cellular is the field set that we created. So I've gone ahead and added this as the field set for reference to this particular feature. So now we let Salesforce CPQ know which field set to use on which particular feature. So if this field is set to blank, then what system will do is it will go ahead and use the out-of-the-box option configuration field set. That is all is needed to configure an inline attribute. So let us go ahead and add this product to a code. Let us go ahead and pick a code. I'm picking a code here, and I'm going to click on Edit Lines. And I'm going to add products. And I'm going to pick iPhone 12. If you notice here, we already had a look at the configuration attribute carrier we created. And also, because we picked that feature and used the field set, we do see the product name, token text, data GB as the columns here, because that is what we wanted in this particular field set. And this field set is only applicable to the carrier feature. So I have another feature for accessories. And if you notice, the columns here are different. So that is why we associated the field set that we created to this particular feature here. Again, if I choose cellular service, I would be able to pick a talk and text, say I want 1,000 minutes of talk text time, and I want unlimited data GB. I would be able to do that here. So this is how we configure and use inline attributes. Now that we have looked at configuration attributes and inline attributes, let us go ahead and look at global attributes. Global attributes allows us to define reusable sets of attributes that are assigned to individual product options. So we don't have to associate individual attributes to individual options, which can get tedious when we have a lot of attributes and a lot of options. So we consolidate them to a set and then associate them to options. For example, size, color, pattern can be reused across different clothing product options, right? So if we have t-shirts, we have shirts, dress, jackets, we could use the size or color or pattern across these product options. So that is where global attribute comes into play. So typically, if you look at the screenshot here, we have multiple product options. Few are clothing related, and the last couple of them are not clothing related, like necklace and handbag. So if you notice here, for the clothing related ones, I've expanded the drawer for the t-shirt, shirt, and the dress. And if you notice here, the color and size are the global attributes, and it is applied to all these product options related to clothing. Now let us look at how do we create global attributes. Regardless of the type of the attribute, like I mentioned earlier, the first step is the same. Create the custom field with the same API name on both the product option and quote line objects. Let us pick a use case here. Say we want to add color and size as the global attributes, and we want to associate it to a set of clothing product options like t-shirt, shirt, dress, and jacket. So the first step here is to create the global attributes. Right after we create the custom fields with the same API name on the product option and the quote line object, we go ahead and create the global attributes. So we create color and size as two different global attributes. And then once these global attributes are created, we are going to group them together into attribute sets. So it can be reused across different clothing product options. So the second step after we create the global attribute is to go ahead and create an attribute set. Say, for example, let us call this as a clothing attribute set, right? How do we link these global attributes that we created with the attribute set? That is where attribute items comes into play. So you can link the global attributes, the color and size that we created to the attribute set, which is a clothing attribute set, using the attribute items. Now that we link this, the next step and the final step is to link the attribute sets to the product options. So that is where product attribute sets comes into play. So product attribute set will link the attribute set that we created, the clothing attribute set, to each of these product options like t-shirt, shirt, dress, and jacket, so that our use case is fulfilled. Now let us get on to our Salesforce CPQ application to see how do we create global attributes. So like I mentioned, the first step, irrespective of which attribute we create, is to create the custom fields in both the product option and the code line object with the same API name. So I have gone ahead and created color and size as two fields on both product option as well as the code line object. So this is our first step. So the next step is to create the global attribute itself, right? So if you remember, the global attributes are not tied to a single product. So we would not start with the bundle like we did for the configuration attribute. Instead, we are going to go to the configuration attributes object in Salesforce CPQ and create our global attributes there. So we just need to come to the configuration attributes and click on new to create the configuration attribute. And you would select a record type here. And in our case, we would need to select the global attribute. Since I've already created, I'm skipping this process. I have went ahead and created color and size as my global attribute. So there are pretty much only three fields here. So one, we give the attribute name. I kept it color. And the target field is important. Again, this is where we store the response that we get to this attribute. So if someone says color is black or color is white, then the target field is where we store this information. Again, if you do not see the field that you created in the pick list here, go ahead and add it as a pick list value and ensure you're using the API name. So I went ahead and created size as well in the same way. So we have the global attributes created. So the next step is to go ahead and create the attribute sets. So let us go ahead and get to the attribute sets object. For demo purposes, I've already created an attribute set, but if you would like to create a new one, you just need to hit on the new button here and you would be able to create the attribute set. Again, a couple of fields, simple fields here, just need to give an attribute set a name, clothing attribute set, that's what I call it, and you would be done. And the next step here is to link the global attributes that we created, which are color and size, and this attribute set that we created, clothing attribute set. So that is where, you remember, attribute items comes into play. So if I go to the related tab on the attribute set, I will see the section for attribute items. So I have went ahead and added the color and size global attributes that I created to this particular attribute set. I have linked it to the attribute set through the attribute items. So if you would like to go ahead and create a new one, you just need to hit this new button and you would be able to select your global attribute that you created here, and you can add a sequence. So sequence will determine your display order. So like I mentioned earlier in my previous videos, the best practice is to leave gaps between the sequence. So later, if you want to come ahead and add another one in between these two, you don't go ahead and renumber everything else. I'm going to cancel this operation because I've already went ahead and added the attribute items for color and size here. So now we created global attributes, and then we have went ahead and created an attribute set, and we also linked back to the global attributes through the attribute items. The next step here is to go ahead and associate this attribute set to the product options, right? So this is where the product attribute sets comes into play, if you remember. So there are a couple ways of achieving this. One way, which is not recommended, is staying back here on the attribute sets itself. And if you see here, there's a section called product attribute sets. We can go ahead and click on new here and do the association. The problem is we need the product option number to be given here, which is typically like PO hyphen and some numbers. So it's really not recommended because it's going to be a cumbersome process. The other way, which is a recommended way to go ahead and link the attribute set to product option, is to do it from the product options itself. So I'm on my bundle product clothing solutions. I already have my options created. If you notice here, I have t-shirt, shirt, dress, jacket, which are clothing product options, and necklace and handbag, which are not directly related to the clothing. And we are only interested in adding our color and size to the first 4 items here, which are related to the clothing. So let us go ahead and open each of these product options and see if we are able to link the product attribute sets here. So if we go to an option here, which is t-shirt, and I go to the related tab, I would see a section for product attribute sets. So this is where we go ahead and associate it. So if you notice here, I have linked the attribute set. So if you want to link a new one, you can go ahead and hit on new. And what we would be able to do is we would be able to pick the attribute set we created. So we already went ahead and did this for our clothing attribute set. And if you have multiple product attribute sets, you can use the sequence to order them. So for demo purposes, I've already did this and I've created the product attribute set here. So product attribute set will link the attribute set that we created here to the individual product options. So instead of going ahead and adding color and size to each of my product options, what we did is we just created an attribute set, and we are going to use this across multiple product options needed. So I have gone ahead and added this as the product attribute set to each of the product options I showed you, the 4 clothing options. Now let us go ahead and see when we add this to the code, how this looks like. I am on my code record. I'm going to add the product bundle to this particular code and see how my global attribute looks like. So I'm going to add clothing solutions as my product. And if you see here, it has added all my options like t-shirt, shirt, dress, jacket, which are clothing related, and necklace and handbag as well. So if you see here, there are this small arrow icon that you notice, which opens up the drawer. And if you notice here, color and size appear as the option for these clothing product options where we went ahead and associated this. And if you notice here, the necklace and handbag, we did not go ahead and associate the global attributes to them. So they do not have this particular global attribute displayed. So this is only available for the product options that we choose. So here we have the flexibility to show it only to the relevant options and not to everything like the inline attribute did, because in the inline attribute, the columns were common for all the options in the feature. If we choose to use the global attributes like we did now for color and size, now as you notice, we are only seeing these for the clothing related product options, which we chose to associate this global attributes to, and the remaining options that are there as part of this bundle do not show this. So one important thing to note is that ensure as a final thing we need for our global attributes to show up is there's a particular setting on package. So let me quickly go here to our Salesforce CPQ package setting. And if I go to the additional setting, there is this enable product option drawer. So ensure this is checked. Otherwise, the global attributes may not show up because we see the attributes in the particular drawer, and the drawer gets visible only if you choose the enable product option drawer here. Now let us go back to our code and go ahead and pick color and size for few. And select these options. Let me select this as well and then save. So this is how we go ahead and create the global attributes. To summarize, in today's session, we looked at what attributes are, what are configuration attributes, inline attributes, global attributes, how we create each of them in Salesforce CPQ. Thank you for listening. Hope you found this session useful. Thank you, Apex Hours, for giving us the opportunity to present this session.